My mother put a folded dish towel under my fiancé's chair before she served dinner. She did it without looking at him, as if she were protecting the cream-colored upholstery from something contagious. Elias stood beside me in a clean navy button-down shirt, his work boots polished, but still carrying a faint gray line of concrete dust around the soles. My father noticed it immediately. "Couldn't you at least wear shoes that don't look like they came straight from a job site?" he asked. Elias smiled once. "I did come straight from a job site, Mr. Vale." That was the moment I should have taken his hand and walked out. Instead, I stood there in my parents' dining room in Columbus, Ohio, 31 years old, and still reacting to my mother's silence the way I had when I was 12. I told myself dinner would be fine. I told myself they would eventually see what I saw in him. I was wrong. My name is Camille Vale, and at the time I worked as a project coordinator for a small architecture firm downtown. I spent my days organizing permit files, meeting notes, and restoration plans for old brick buildings that everyone else had forgotten were worth saving. Elias Morgan was 34 and worked construction. At least that was the word my family used whenever they wanted to make him sound smaller than he was. Construction worker. Laborer. The man with the hard hat. They said it with polite smiles, as though they were not insulting him, as though they were simply stating a fact that placed him beneath the people they considered successful. Elias had never tried to impress them. That was part of what made them dislike him. My father respected people who made sure everyone knew what they owned. My mother respected people who could turn a dinner party into a performance. My younger sister Brielle respected whoever had the newest house, the newest car, or the most expensive ring. Elias did not perform. He showed up, he worked, he listened, and when he spoke, people tended to stop talking because he never wasted words. My parents' dining room was designed to make people feel judged. The table was long enough for 12, though there were only 6 of us that night. My mother had arranged white candles down the center, polished every wine glass twice, and placed name cards at each setting, like she was hosting diplomats instead of her own family. Elias's card had been placed at the far end of the table. Mine was beside him. Brielle sat across from us with her husband Darren, a commercial real estate broker who had spent most of the last year bragging about a new investment group he had joined. He wore a pale gray suit to dinner even though it was a Sunday evening, and he kept checking his phone beneath the tablecloth, as if the city might collapse without his supervision. My father raised his glass before the first course had even arrived. "To progress," he said. "To people who understand that hard work is not enough anymore, you have to know how to move up." Darren smiled into his wine. My mother looked toward Elias. "That's an important lesson for young people." I watched Elias set down his fork. He did not flinch. He did not look angry. He simply nodded once, the way he did when someone on a job site gave him a problem that could be fixed with the right tools. "I agree," he said. My father leaned back in his chair. "Good. Then maybe you can explain something to me. Why does a man your age still spend his days pouring concrete and carrying steel beams?" The room went quiet. I felt heat rise into my face. My stomach tightened so sharply that I had to press my knees together beneath the table. It was not the first cruel thing my father had said about Elias. It was just the first time he had said it directly to him. Elias reached for his water glass. "Because the work matters." Darren gave a small laugh. "That's noble." "It is," Elias said. My father shook his head like he was disappointed by the answer. "Camille has a degree. She has a career. She has options. I just don't want her building a life around someone who is content staying in the same place." I had heard versions of that sentence my entire life. My father had said it when I wanted to study architecture instead of finance. He had said it when I turned down a corporate job in Chicago because I wanted to stay near the old neighborhoods I loved. He had said it when I rented my first apartment instead of moving back home and saving every dollar toward the kind of house he believed would prove I had made it. In my family, love always came with an evaluation. You were praised when you looked right. You were tolerated when you needed something. You were criticized when you became inconvenient. Elias knew all of that without me ever explaining every detail. He had seen the way my mother corrected my posture at parties. He had watched my father compare my salary to Darren's. He had heard Brielle say that I was too sensitive whenever I pointed out that she had hurt me. Still, he never pushed me to fight them. He just waited for me to understand that I could. My mother brought out the roast chicken and placed the largest serving plate in front of Darren. "Darren has been very busy lately," she said. He's helping with some exciting downtown development plans. Darren sat a little taller. Nothing official yet. There are still approvals to get through. What kind of development, I asked, even though I already knew where this was going. The South Market redevelopment, Brielle said quickly. The old warehouse district. Luxury apartments, restaurants, office space. The whole area is finally going to become something. Elias's expression did not change. But I noticed his thumb rest against the edge of his glass. My father glanced at him. You probably know the site. You've worked around there, haven't you? I have, Elias said. Darren grinned. Maybe you'll get lucky and land a subcontract. The words were soft, casual, almost friendly. That was what made them cruel. I looked at Darren, then at Brielle, waiting for one of them to realize what he had said. Neither did. Brielle just adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist and smiled at her husband as if he had made a clever joke. My mother sighed. Well, everyone starts somewhere. That was the sentence that finally broke something inside me. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a small clean crack. Because Elias had been working since he was 16, he had started hauling lumber for his uncle after school. He had learned welding concrete, site safety, electrical systems, and structural framing. He had worked through snowstorms and heat warnings, and weeks when his back hurt so badly he could barely sleep. He had never complained. He had never asked my parents for anything. And still they looked at him as though his hands made him less worthy of sitting at their table. I set down my fork. You could all try speaking to him like he's a person. My father's face changed first. His eyes narrowed and I saw the old warning there. The look that used to make me apologize before I had even done anything wrong. Camille, he said quietly. No, I said. My voice shook but I kept going. Elias works harder than anyone at this table. He's kind to people when no one is watching. He has never made me feel ashamed of where I come from or what I do. So, maybe stop acting like a suit and a title automatically makes someone better. Darren looked offended. Brielle rolled her eyes. Nobody said he was a bad person. You don't have to say it, I told her. You've been showing it all night. My mother put down her napkin. This is exactly why we worry about you. You always make everything emotional. I almost laughed. There it was again. The family rule. When they hurt you, you were emotional. When you reacted, you were difficult. When you defended yourself, you were ungrateful. Elias reached under the table and placed his hand over mine. His palm was warm and rough, steady against my shaking fingers. I appreciate you, he said quietly. Then he looked at my parents. But Camille is right. We should leave. My father stood so quickly that his chair scraped against the floor. If you walk out of this house over a harmless conversation, don't expect us to chase after you. My chest tightened. A part of me still wanted him to take it back. I wanted my mother to stand up and say that nobody was leaving. I wanted Brielle to look ashamed. I wanted my father to remember that I was his daughter before I was a disappointment. None of that happened. My mother only said, "Don't be dramatic, Camille. Your father is trying to protect you." Protect me. From a man who had spent 3 years proving he was safe. From a man who called my grandmother every Sunday after she moved into assisted living because my own parents were too busy. From a man who had driven 2 hours in the rain to fix my apartment window after my landlord ignored me. From a man who never once made me feel like I had to earn tenderness. I stood up. Elias stood with me. My mother watched us reach the front door, her expression frozen somewhere between anger and disbelief. My father did not look at me. He stared toward the dining room, toward the untouched candles and polished plates, as if the real offense was that we had ruined the picture he wanted to keep. Outside, the air was cold enough to sting. Elias opened the passenger door of his truck for me, and I sat down without speaking. The cab smelled faintly of cedar coffee and the peppermint gum he always kept in the center console. There was a hard hat on the back seat and a folded blueprint case near my feet. I stared at it through blurred vision. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Elias started the engine but did not pull away. For what? For them. He looked at me then, really looked at me. "Camille, their behavior is not your debt." I started crying after that. Not loudly. I hated crying in front of people, especially after my family had spent years teaching me that tears made me weak. But Elias did not tell me to calm down. He did not tell me it was fine. He just reached across the console and held my hand until I could breathe again. When we got home, he carried the blueprint case inside. I watched him set it on the kitchen counter. It was dark, gray, old at the corners and locked with a small brass clasp. I had seen it before, but I had never asked what he kept in it. Elias was private about work, not secretive exactly, just careful. He believed that people who talked constantly about what they were building usually had less to show for it. That night, he unlocked the case. Inside were architectural renderings, land surveys, contractor schedules, meeting packets, and a thick folder marked SO Youth Market Redevelopment City Review. I looked up at him. "Why do you have those?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out a single sheet of paper and placed it in front of me. At the bottom was a list of names. The first name belonged to a development company I recognized from local news. The second name was Elias Morgan. Beside it were two words that made my breath stop. 50% owner. He did not smile. He did not look proud. He only said, "I didn't tell you because I wanted your family to meet me before they met what I could buy." Then he looked toward the dark window above our sink where the city lights flickered beyond the glass. "But there's a council meeting on Thursday. And after that, they won't get to pretend they never knew." The next morning, my mother called before 8. I watched her name light up my phone while I stood in my kitchen, still wearing one of Elias's old work shirts and holding a mug of coffee I had forgotten to drink. For a full minute I let it ring, then I answered because some habits are harder to break than others. "Camille," she said, already sounding wounded. "Your father barely slept. You embarrassed him in his own home." I looked at the blueprint case on the counter. Its brass clasp caught the morning light. "I embarrassed him. Please don't do this. We invited Elias because we were trying. But he has to understand our concerns." "Our concerns," I repeated. My mother exhaled sharply. "You know what I mean. A marriage is practical. Love is not enough. Your father wants to know whether Elias can provide the kind of future you deserve." I almost told her. I almost said, "He owns half the biggest downtown redevelopment project in Columbus." I almost told her that the man she had treated like he was lucky to sit at her table was about to stand before the city council as one of the people reshaping its skyline. But I remembered Elias's face when he opened the folder. Not proud. Not vindictive. Just tired. So I said, "You didn't want to know whether he could provide. You wanted to know whether he looked impressive enough while doing it." Then I ended the call. For the next 2 days, my family tried to turn the dinner into something smaller than it had been. My father sent one text message that said, "You both overreacted." Brielle sent 3, all carefully written to sound reasonable. The first said she hoped I was okay. The second said Darren had not meant anything by the subcontractor comment. The third said Mom was crying, and Dad felt deeply disrespected. There was nothing in any of them about Elias. Nothing about the dish towel under his chair. Nothing about my father questioning his worth. Nothing about the fact that everyone at that table had watched a good man be insulted and decided the real problem was that I had objected. That was when I understood something I should have understood years earlier. My family did not apologize for harm. They apologized for tension. Elias left for work early every morning that week. He kissed my forehead, pulled on his jacket, and drove toward the South Market site before sunrise. I watched him from the apartment window one morning as he crossed the parking lot with a thermos in one hand and his hard hat in the other. There was something different about seeing him after I knew. Not because I suddenly valued him more. I had always valued him. But I finally understood the shape of the pressure he had been carrying. He had been walking into city meetings, negotiating contracts, reviewing environmental reports, and answering to investors with names my father would recognize. Then he had come home, changed into jeans, and spent hours at the site because he refused to ask workers to do jobs he was unwilling to understand himself. He did not work construction because he had nowhere else to go. He worked construction because he believed buildings should be understood from the ground up. On Tuesday night he came home later than usual. There was dust on the shoulders of his jacket and a fresh scrape across one knuckle. I noticed it when he set his keys down beside the blueprint case. He saw me looking at it and gave me a tired smile. "Long day. Council packet revisions," he said. "And an excavation issue near the old rail line." I leaned against the counter. "You know, you don't have to keep proving anything to them." "I'm not. But Thursday is going to prove it anyway. His expression softened. Thursday is about the project. And my family will be there. They may be. They will, I said. Darren has been talking about South Market for months. Elias nodded slowly. I know. The way he said it made me look up. What do you mean you know? He sat down at the kitchen table and rubbed a hand across his jaw. Darren's brokerage firm has been trying to position itself for the retail leasing contracts. I felt my stomach tighten. He works with the project. Not with us. Around us. His company has been circulating proposals. And he knows you're an owner? No. I stared at him. He met with one of our junior development analysts last month, Elias continued. He pitched himself as someone with strong family connections in Columbus. Apparently he talked about your father's business network. My face burned. My father owns a chain of dental supply warehouses, I said. He doesn't have city development connections. I know. And Darren has been making it sound like he does. Elias did not answer right away. He did not need to. I suddenly saw the dinner table differently. Darren's smug smile, the way he talked about the project like it belonged to him, the way he called Elias a possible subcontractor. He had not just been looking down on Elias. He had been trying to position himself above him. That night I lay awake long after Elias fell asleep. The city lights cut pale lines through our blinds and I kept thinking about my father's toast. To progress. To people who know how to move up. He had meant Darren. He had meant men who wore suits, knew the right people, and made wealth look effortless. But Elias had moved up without stepping on anyone's neck. He had built something slowly, carefully, with years of work no one in my family had bothered to notice, because his hands were rough and his boots had dust on them. The next afternoon, Brielle appeared at my apartment without warning. She stood outside my door in a camel-colored coat holding a bakery box from the expensive French place near her house. Her hair was smooth, her lipstick perfect, and her eyes already irritated that I had not opened the door faster. I brought pastries, she said. That doesn't answer why you're here. She gave me a strained smile. Can I come in? I should have said no. Instead, I stepped aside. Brielle walked through my apartment like she was inspecting a hotel room. Her eyes moved over the bookshelves, the framed site sketches Elias had brought home from projects, the half-finished plants on the windowsill. When she saw the blueprint case on the dining table, she paused. Is that his? Yes. She glanced at it again. He really takes work home, huh? He runs part of a major development project, Brielle. The words came out before I could stop them. Her face froze. Then she laughed, a thin little sound. Camille, you don't have to make things up because you're embarrassed. I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Clarity. I'm not making anything up. Brielle placed the bakery box on the counter. Darren said Elias works with crews downtown. That's not the same thing as running a project. Darren doesn't know everything. Obviously. She crossed her arms. But he knows enough. And honestly, I don't understand why you're so defensive. Nobody said Elias was worthless. Dad just thinks you deserve someone who can meet you where you are. I looked at her for a long moment. Where do you think I am? She blinked. Because, from where I'm standing, I said I have spent most of my life trying to become someone Dad could brag about. You married a man who turns every room into a sales pitch. You learned how to call that confidence. And now you think you can walk into my home and tell me what I deserve. Don't twist this. I'm not twisting anything. Her mouth tightened. You always do this. You make people feel guilty for caring about you. There it was. The sentence she had used since we were teenagers. When she borrowed my clothes and ruined them, I was dramatic. When she told our parents private things I had trusted her with, I was too sensitive. When she moved in with Darren and stopped calling unless she needed something, I was difficult. And now, when she came into my home to defend the man who had laughed at my fiancé, I was the one making her feel guilty. Brielle took a breath and softened her voice. Look, I came because I wanted to help. Thursday's council meeting is important to Darren. He says the redevelopment team might be finalizing vendor relationships soon. I stared at her. Okay. She hesitated. Could you ask Elias if he knows anyone involved? Maybe he could put in a good word. Darren has been working so hard and this would be huge for him. For a second, I could not speak. The audacity was almost beautiful. They had humiliated Elias because they believed he was beneath them. Then, without knowing who he was, they had come to me asking for access to his world. He knows someone involved, I said. Brielle's face brightened. Really? Yes. Who? I picked up the blueprint case and rested my hand on the brass clasp. The person who decides whether Darren's company gets anywhere near South Market. Her smile vanished. What does that mean? It means you should come to the council meeting. She stared at me, confused and suspicious. Then she reached for her purse. You're being weird. No, I said calmly. I'm done being quiet. She left without taking the pastry box. That evening my father called. Not to apologize. Not to ask how I was. He called because Brielle had told him I claimed Elias was connected to South Market, and my father wanted to know whether I was trying to embarrass the family again. I stood beside the living room window while he talked. Outside, a city bus passed through the rain, its headlights sliding across the wet pavement. Elias was still at the site. He had sent one message an hour earlier. Late meeting. Eat without me. You are not going to use Thursday as some kind of stunt, my father said. I almost laughed. A stunt. You know what I mean. Darren has a professional reputation. He does not need you creating confusion around his business opportunities because you're angry about dinner. Dad, you don't even know what Elias does. I know enough. No, I said. You know what you decided to see. His voice went cold. Camille, don't speak to me like I'm ignorant. Then stop acting like you're entitled to judge someone you never bothered to understand. For several seconds there was only silence. Then he said, That man has made you hostile. I closed my eyes. No, I told him. He made me honest. My father hung up on me. When Elias came home after 10, he found me sitting on the floor beside the couch with the council packet open in front of me. I had not read every page, but I had read enough to understand that Thursday would not be a casual public meeting. The South Market redevelopment was the largest mixed-use plan the city had approved in over a decade. It involved old warehouses, public transit access, affordable retail spaces, a community arts center, and a complicated agreement that required community support before final permits could be issued. At the top of the ownership page, printed in clean black letters, were two names. Klein Urban Development Group. Morganfield Holdings. Elias sat beside me on the floor. You didn't have to read all of that tonight, he said. I wanted to. He looked down at the folder, then back at me. Are you sure you want to be there Thursday? I thought about my mother's dish towel. My father's toast. Darren's laugh. Brielle standing in my apartment asking for a favor she did not believe Elias had the power to give. Yes, I said. Elias studied my face. This could get ugly. It already was ugly. He reached for my hand. For the first time, I did not feel afraid of what my family might say next. I felt afraid of how long I had allowed them to say it. On Wednesday afternoon, Darren sent me a message. It was only one sentence. Hey, can we talk before Thursday? I think there's been a misunderstanding. I read it 3 times. Then I looked at the gray blueprint case on the table at the brass clasp, at the evidence of a life my family had dismissed because it did not arrive wrapped in the right kind of packaging. Something told me Darren was not worried about a misunderstanding. He was worried that for the first time he had insulted someone who could not be safely ignored. I did not answer Darren's message that night. By Thursday morning he had sent 2 more. The first said he wanted to clear the air. The second said, I don't want this to turn into a family problem. That line stayed on my screen while I got dressed for the council meeting, because it revealed exactly how he saw the world. Not as a place where people should be honest. As a place where problems only existed when they became inconvenient for someone important. I wore a dark green blouse, black slacks, and the small gold earrings my grandmother had given me when I graduated college. I had almost chosen a dress. Then I remembered my mother's face at dinner, the way she had looked at Elias's boots, as though decency came with a price tag. I wanted to feel like myself, not like the version of me that made them comfortable. Elias came out of the bedroom in a charcoal suit I had only seen twice before. It fit him perfectly, but he still looked more like himself with the faint white scar on his knuckle and the calm expression that never seemed to change, no matter how difficult the room became. He held his tie in one hand, studying it like it had personally offended him. "You look nervous," I said. "I'm not nervous," he said. "You're holding that tie like you want to throw it out the window." He looked down at it, then smiled. "I'm considering it." I stepped closer and fixed it for him. My fingers shook a little, though I tried not to let him see. He covered my hand with his once I was done, his thumb resting over my wrist. "You don't owe anyone a performance today," he said. "Not your father, not your sister, not Darren." "I know. You can leave whenever you want." I looked at him. "Are you planning to leave?" "No." That made me smile. The council meeting was scheduled for 6 o'clock at City Hall in a large brick building downtown that I had passed hundreds of times without ever going inside. By 5:30, the public parking lot was already filling. There were local business owners, neighborhood association members, reporters with laptops, college students wearing civic engagement badges, and older residents holding folders full of notes. South Market had become more than a development project. It had become an argument about what the city wanted to be. Elias parked beside a row of trucks and sedans, then turned off the engine. For a moment, neither of us moved. "I know you said you don't want this to be about my family," I said quietly. "It isn't. But they will make it about themselves." He nodded once. "That's what people do when they can't admit they misjudged someone. They try to make the truth feel personal." I took a slow breath. Then my phone buzzed again. "Darren." This time the message was longer. "I know you're there. I'm asking you as family, please don't let Elias do something stupid. I didn't know who he was and I didn't mean anything by the dinner comment. We all say things when we're stressed. Let's handle this privately." I stared at the words. He did not apologize for humiliating Elias. He apologized for not knowing Elias had power. That was different. I typed one reply. "You did know who he was. You just decided his work made him less than you." Then I put my phone on silent. Inside, the council chamber smelled like old wood paper and rain carried in on people's coats. The seats were arranged in rows facing a long, elevated desk where 7 council members would soon take their places. Behind them hung the city seal, polished brass against dark blue fabric. Elias and I sat near the front beside 2 women I recognized from the project packet. One was Regina Klein, the managing partner of Klein Urban Development Group. She was in her early 50s, sharp-eyed, silver-haired, and dressed in a cream suit that looked expensive without trying too hard. The other was a younger woman named Janelle Ortiz, South Market's Community Relations Director. Regina stood when she saw Elias. "Mr. Morgan," she said, extending her hand. "Ready. As I'll ever be." She turned to me. "You must be Camille." "Yes. I've heard good things." I was not sure what to say to that, so I smiled and shook her hand. Then I noticed my father. He was standing near the back doors with my mother, Brielle, and Darren. My mother wore a navy dress and pearl earrings. My father had one hand in his pocket, and the other resting against the back of an empty chair like he was trying to claim space before anyone else could. Brielle saw me first. Her expression changed when she noticed who I was sitting with. Darren followed her gaze. For the first time since I had known him, he looked genuinely afraid. My father walked toward us. He did not greet Elias. He greeted me. "Camille," he said, his voice low, "we need to talk." I stood, though every instinct told me to remain seated. "This isn't the place." "It is exactly the place if you're planning to embarrass your sister's husband." Darren came closer, carrying a leather portfolio against his chest. His suit was darker than the one he had worn at dinner and his jaw looked tight enough to crack. "Camille," he said, "can we please be adults for 1 minute?" I looked at him. "Adults apologize when they hurt someone," I said. "They don't show up at City Hall and ask the person they insulted to protect their business." His face went pale. My father glanced between us. "What business?" Darren spoke too quickly. "Nothing. There's been confusion about a proposal my firm submitted." Regina looked up from the papers in front of her. Her eyes settled on Darren's portfolio. "Oh," she said. That one word changed the air around us. Darren froze. Regina stepped forward, polite enough that nobody else in the room would have noticed the sharpness beneath her tone. You're Darren Vale. He nodded slowly. Yes. I thought that might be you. My father looked from Darren to Regina. Do you know my son-in-law? Not personally, Regina said. But we received a leasing advisory proposal from his firm last week. Darren's hand tightened around the portfolio. Right, he said. That's what I was trying to explain. Regina smiled without warmth. No need. We reviewed it. My mother gave a nervous laugh. Well, that's wonderful. Darren has been working so hard on this opportunity. Regina's expression did not change. I'm sure he has. Darren leaned toward her. I think there may have been some misunderstanding about language in the proposal. There was no misunderstanding, Regina said. Your firm represented that you had a direct family connection to the managing ownership group and implied you had advanced knowledge of leasing preferences. My father's face tightened. What? Darren turned toward him. It wasn't like that. Regina continued, still calm. The proposal also suggested that Mr. Vale could facilitate private introductions to decision-makers in exchange for an exclusive brokerage arrangement. Brielle looked at Darren as if she had never seen him before. Darren, she whispered. He swallowed. That's not what it meant. Your company's letterhead says otherwise, Regina replied. My mother looked embarrassed now, but not for the reason she should have been. She looked embarrassed because people were watching. My father's eyes shifted toward Elias. Finally. For the first time that evening, he seemed to understand there was something he did not know. Who are you people? He asked. Elias stood beside me. He did not look smug. He did not look angry. He simply reached for the gray blueprint case he had brought in with him and placed it on the table beside Regina's documents. South Market's managing ownership group, he said. My father stared at him. Darren's face went completely still. Brielle looked at me, then back at Elias, her mouth slightly open. You own this project, my father asked. Elias shook his head once. Not all of it. The answer should have relieved them. Instead, it made everything worse. Then, what exactly is your role? My father asked. Elias opened the blueprint case. Inside were site plans, financial reports, permit schedules, and the same ownership packet I had seen on our kitchen floor. He pulled out a single page and placed it where my father could see. My company owns 50% of Morgan Field Holdings, he said. Morgan Field Holdings owns 50% of the South Market Redevelopment Partnership. My father's eyes dropped to the paper. He read it once. Then again. Darren stood very still, as if moving would make the words more real. My mother looked at Elias differently now. I hated that. I hated the sudden calculation in her eyes. The way her posture softened because she had finally found a version of him she could explain to her friends. But Elias saw it too. That was why his next words mattered. I still worked construction on the site yesterday, he said. And I'll be there tomorrow morning. Ownership doesn't make a person better than the people doing the work. It just means they have more responsibility not to forget them. No one spoke. The chamber around us was filling now. Voices rose and chairs scraped against the floor. A reporter near the side wall looked in our direction, sensing the shape of a story without knowing the details. My father folded his arms. Why didn't you tell us? Elias closed the blueprint case. Because I didn't think it should matter. My father's face hardened. Of course it matters. That's the problem, I said. He looked at me. For years, that look had been enough to make me lose my nerve. It carried every old warning. Every time I had been told I was too emotional, too difficult, too ungrateful. Every time my father had acted like disagreement was betrayal. But this time I did not look away. You didn't care whether Elias was kind, I said. You didn't care whether he made me happy. You cared whether he could impress you. And now that you know he can, you want to act like the dinner was just a misunderstanding. My mother reached for my arm. Camille, please. People are listening. I stepped back before she could touch me. Good, I said. Brielle started crying quietly. Not because she understood everything. I could see that much. She was crying because the story she had believed about her marriage, her husband, her family, and herself was beginning to fall apart in a room where she could not control who saw it. Darren leaned toward Elias. I didn't know, he said. Elias looked at him. That was clear. I made a mistake. You made a business proposal based on access you didn't have. I thought Camille could introduce us. You thought you could use her, I said. Darren turned toward me. I was trying to help my family. The word family landed between us like something rotten. My father stepped in. This does not need to become a public spectacle. Regina checked her watch. It already is a public meeting, she said. Then, the council chamber went quiet. The council members had entered through the side door and taken their seats. The chairperson adjusted her microphone, welcomed everyone, and began reading the agenda. South Market redevelopment approval was listed third. My father stood beside me silent now. My mother sat 2 rows behind us with Brielle. Darren remained near the aisle, his portfolio clutched so tightly against his chest that the leather bent under his fingers. When the chairperson reached the third agenda item, she looked toward Regina. Miss Klein, she said. Would you and your co-development partner please come forward? Regina rose first. Then, Elias stood. He looked at me once before walking toward the podium. And behind us I heard my father whisper the words he should have said days ago. Oh my God. When Elias stepped to the podium, the room changed around him. Not because he was suddenly wearing a suit. Not because my father had finally learned what his name meant on a business document. The room changed because Elias spoke the way he worked, without rushing, without performing, and without pretending the hardest parts did not exist. He thanked the council, then began explaining South Market in clear, practical language. He talked about restoring the old warehouse facades instead of tearing them down. He talked about public transit access, local retail spaces, and construction jobs reserved for workers already living in Columbus. He did not sound like a man selling luxury. He sounded like a man explaining responsibility. A council member asked about the concerns raised by neighborhood groups. Elias nodded before she had even finished the question. Their right to ask, he said. Development can become another word for displacement when people with money make decisions about communities they do not know. We are not asking this city to trust us because we have a polished rendering. We are asking you to hold us accountable to the agreement in front of you. He lifted a document from the gray blueprint case. It was not a contract meant to impress investors. It was a community benefit agreement. It included apprenticeship placements, local hiring requirements, retail spaces set aside for independent businesses, and a promise that the Community Arts Center would remain publicly accessible for at least 20 years. My father sat very still behind me. At dinner he had asked why Elias was still pouring concrete and carrying steel beams. Now he was listening to him explain how construction crews would be protected from being treated like disposable labor once the project became profitable. I could feel my own anger shift. It did not disappear, but it became sharper, cleaner. My father had judged Elias because he believed work only mattered when it came with authority. Elias had authority. He simply refused to use it as a weapon. The council chair asked whether Morganfield Holdings had selected its leasing and brokerage partners yet. Elias glanced toward Regina, then answered carefully. No exclusive agreements have been awarded, he said. Every proposal is being reviewed through a documented process. No applicant receives private access, preferred treatment, or influence through personal relationships. The words were calm, but they landed with force. Darren stood near the aisle, his face stiff and colorless. His portfolio was no longer pressed confidently against his chest. It hung at his side now, like something heavy he had been forced to carry. Regina added, for clarity, any proposal that misrepresents access to ownership or decision-makers has been removed from consideration. Our team has a written ethics policy, and we intend to follow it. A few people in the audience shifted in their seats. My mother looked down at her hands. Brielle covered her mouth. My father did not look at Darren. He looked at the floor. It was not dramatic in the way my family usually defined drama. Nobody shouted, nobody pointed, nobody made a scene. That made it worse for them. The truth was sitting in the middle of the room, plain and undeniable, and there was nowhere for anyone to hide behind manners. Darren's entire identity had been built around being the person with access. The person who knew the right people. The person who could open doors. But the door he had tried to sell was not his. And the man he had mocked was standing at the podium with the keys. The council meeting lasted another hour. Residents spoke about parking, rent increases, noise, and whether the project would keep its promises once construction began. Elias listened to every speaker, He took notes. He answered what he could and admitted what still needed work. That was what struck me most. He did not use the meeting to punish my family. He did not even look back at them. He simply showed everyone who he was. When the final vote came, the council approved the redevelopment plan by 6 votes to 1. The chamber filled with applause, some relieved, some cautious. Regina shook Elias's hand. Janelle hugged him quickly. Reporters moved toward the podium with questions about timelines and funding. My father stood before I could stop him. For 1 second I thought he was going to approach Elias. Instead, he came toward me. "Camille," he said. His voice was low, different. Not softer exactly, just uncertain. I looked at him and waited. He glanced past me toward Elias, who was answering a reporter's question about apprenticeship programs. "You knew?" "Yes. And you let us make fools of ourselves." I stared at him. That was what he chose. Not I was wrong. Not I treated him badly. Not I hurt you. You let us make fools of ourselves. Something inside me finally stopped reaching for him. "You made that choice yourselves," I said. His face tightened. "We didn't know." "You didn't want to know." "Camille." "No, Dad. You had 3 years to know him. You knew he worked long hours. You knew he showed up for Grandma. You knew he helped me when I was struggling. You knew he loved me, but none of that counted because you thought his boots meant he had failed." He looked genuinely wounded then. Maybe he expected me to soften. Maybe he expected the old version of me to realize he was uncomfortable and rush to make it easier for him. I did not. "You didn't insult him because you misunderstood him," I said. "You insulted him because you believed some work makes people smaller. And now you want forgiveness because you found out you were wrong about his money." My father swallowed. Behind him, my mother had started toward us. Brielle stood beside her, tears streaking down her face. Darren was gone. I had not even seen him leave. My mother reached for my hand. "Camille, sweetheart, we were trying to protect you." I stepped back. The same sentence. The same excuse. Only this time, it had no power over me. "You were protecting the version of me that made you comfortable," I said. "The one who smiled when she was hurt. The one who apologized when you were cruel. I'm not doing that anymore." My mother's eyes filled with tears. For years, that would have been enough to make me forgive her before she ever asked. But I had learned something from Elias. A person can be sad and still be wrong. A person can love you and still harm you. And your compassion does not require you to hand them the knife again. Brielle approached slowly. "Camille," she said. "I didn't know Darren did that." "You didn't know because you didn't ask," I said. She flinched. I hated hurting her. I did. Brielle was still my sister. She was still the girl who had once climbed into my bed during thunderstorms and asked me to tell her stories until she fell asleep. But she had become someone who watched people be humiliated and called it concern. "I thought he was trying to build something," she whispered. So did I. She looked toward the exit where Darren had disappeared. Then, back at me. "I'm sorry." It was not enough. But it was the first sentence anyone in my family had said that sounded like it belonged to the truth. I nodded once. "I hope you mean that someday." Then I walked away. Elias was waiting near the side hallway, away from the reporters and council members. His tie had loosened slightly. There was a tiredness in his eyes, but when he saw me, his expression changed. "How are you?" he asked. I laughed once quietly. "I think I just ended a version of my life." He took my hand. "You didn't end it," he said. "You chose yourself in it." Outside rain had started again. The city lights reflected across the wet sidewalk, turning the pavement into ribbons of gold and red. Elias opened the passenger door of his truck, the same truck my father had once looked at with barely hidden disgust. The same truck, with the hard hat in the back seat, and the blueprint case near my feet. I got in without apologizing. For the first time, I did not feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was going somewhere. The weeks after the council meeting were quieter than I expected. My father sent a message the next morning. It said he hoped we could move past the misunderstanding. I read it once and did not reply. My mother sent a longer email about family forgiveness and how painful it had been to watch the evening unfold. She wrote 3 paragraphs about the embarrassment she felt at City Hall. She wrote one sentence about Elias. I did not reply to that either. Brielle called 2 weeks later. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered. She did not ask me to fix anything. She did not defend Darren. She only said she had found copies of emails on their shared laptop. Emails showing that he had been exaggerating his connections for months, using my father's name in meetings, telling people he had inside access to city officials and developers. She sounded small, not helpless. Just finally awake. I don't know who I married, she said. I sat by the window watching workers unload steel beams at the site across the street from my office. You married who he was when he thought nobody would question him, I said. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I'm sorry I didn't see what they were doing to you. I closed my eyes. That doesn't fix it. I know. But it matters that you see it now. She started crying then. I did not tell her everything would be okay. I did not promise we would go back to being sisters the way we once were. Some relationships do not heal because one person finally understands the damage. They heal only when that understanding becomes a different pattern. Still, I told her she could call me when she was ready to make decisions that belonged to her. That was the boundary. Not a slammed door. Not revenge. A door that only opened when respect came with it. Elias and I spent most Saturdays at the South Market site after that. Sometimes I helped Janelle organize community feedback notes. Sometimes I just walked with Elias through the old warehouse corridors, while he pointed out beams that could be restored, walls that needed reinforcement, and windows he wanted to keep because they caught the afternoon light. He still wore work boots. He still carried coffee in a scratched steel thermos. He still came home with dust on his sleeves. The only difference was that now, when people saw him, they understood what he had built. But I had learned not to care as much whether they understood. One afternoon we stood on the roof of an old brick warehouse while crews worked below us. The city stretched out in every direction, loud and unfinished. Elias had his hard hat tucked under one arm, wind moved through his dark hair. You know, he said, your father asked Regina for my number. I looked at him. Did she give it to him? No. I smiled. What would you have done if he called? Elias looked out over the street. I would have answered once, he said. And then, I would have asked whether he wanted to know me, or whether he wanted something from me. That was Elias. No performance, no cruelty, no need to make anyone smaller. Just the truth, held steady. The night my parents humiliated my fiancé for working construction, they thought the dust on his boots meant he did not belong at their table. They were wrong. The dust meant he had been building something real while they were busy measuring people by what they could display. And by the time they finally understood, I had learned that I did not need their table to belong anywhere at all.